The move, the music, the magic, it's solid. Shoot. Colloidal gold particles, conjugated to various macromolecules, have become useful and popular labels with applications in both light and electron microscopy. The particles can be made from 1 to 150 nanometers in size, allowing them to be used for double or triple labeling. The most commonly used sizes range from 5 to 30 nanometers. This platelet was labeled with fibrinogen conjugated to 18 nanometer gold, then permeabilized with detergent and labeled with 5 nanometer gold conjugated to antitubulin. The smaller gold sizes are especially useful for labeling structures which may not be accessible to larger probes, or for labeling structures which are small and close together. Larger gold sizes are most useful when ease of detectability is important, such as on rough cell surfaces like this macrophage or in light microscopy. Proteins conjugated to colloidal gold generally retain their activity. Here we see a high magnification of 30 nanometer gold particles conjugated to fibrinogen, labeling the fibrinogen receptor on a platelet surface. The fibrinogen, a long rod-shaped molecule, forms a thin layer over the gold. Narrow strands corresponding in size to chains of the fibrinogen molecule can be seen connecting the conjugate to the platelet surface. In this time-lapse video of fibrinogen gold labeling of platelets spread on a formbar grid, 30 nanometer fibrinogen gold particles can be seen to attach and move across the surface of a spread platelet on the lower right. While the particles are too small to be resolved in the light microscope, their inflated diffraction image makes it possible to detect and follow the movement of individual particles. The dark band surrounding the center of the platelet marks the final position of a number of particles. Subsequent observation of the same specimen by scanning electron microscopy allows positive identification of the gold labels, several of which are marked by arrows here on the surface of the platelet. Observation of the specimen by high-voltage electron microscopy permits correlation of the positions of the labels with underlying cytoskeletal structures and identification of subsurface labels. In general, production of colloidal gold sols involves the reduction of a dilute solution of gold chloride by various reducing agents. Particle size is controlled by varying the amount and type of reducing agent used. Sodium citrate is commonly used to prepare larger particles. Mixing varying amounts of tannic acid with the sodium citrate produces particles of very narrow size range from 3 to 17 nanometers in size. A solution of white phosphorus dissolved in ether is used to produce the smallest particles. The key to successful production of colloidal gold is cleanliness. All glassware should be carefully cleaned with a non-ionic detergent and rinsed thoroughly with distilled water. The flask used in the reduction of the gold chloride should be used only for the production of gold. All solutions introduced to the flask should first be filtered through a microporous filter. To prepare particles of 16 to 150 nanometers in size, varying amounts of sodium citrate are used as the reducing agent. The amount of gold in the solution is held constant, and as the amount of citrate used decreases, the size of the resultant particles increases. Half a milliliter of 4% gold chloride dissolved in pre-filtered distilled water is mixed with 200 milliliters of distilled water in the cleaned boiling flask. The gold chloride solution is heated to boiling with a condenser in place to maintain the volume of the solution. The 1% sodium citrate solution is filtered immediately prior to being added to the boiling gold chloride solution. As the reaction proceeds, the mixture turns blue-black and then, for these 18 nanometer particles, to a clear red color. Suspensions of larger 40 to 50 nanometer particles have a slight blue cast to the final color, and 100 to 150 nanometer particles turn a cloudy brown. After the final color change, the gold is refluxed for 20 to 30 minutes to allow the reaction to come to completion. After cooling, the sol can be transferred to a clean bottle and stored at 4 degrees centigrade. To make particles of 3 to 17 nanometers diameter, gold chloride is reduced by a mixture of sodium citrate and tannic acid. From 0.01 to 5 mils of tannic acid is mixed with 4 mils of 1% sodium citrate. The larger amounts of tannic acid must be neutralized by the addition of an equal amount of 25 millimolar potassium carbonate. Water is added to bring the total volume to 20 milliliters. To make 5 nanometer gold particles by the tannic acid method, 1 milliliter of pre-filtered 1% tannic acid is mixed with 4 milliliters of 1% sodium citrate, 1 milliliter of 25 millimolar potassium carbonate to neutralize the pH, and 14 milliliters of distilled water to bring the volume of the solution to 20 milliliters. 0.25 milliliters of 4% gold chloride is added to 80 milliliters of distilled water. The two solutions are warmed to 60 degrees centigrade and rapidly mixed. The mixture will turn red quickly. When smaller amounts of tannic acid are used, the color change occurs more slowly, turning first to blue-black and then to red, as with the sodium citrate method. To complete the reaction, heat the mixture to boiling. To make 5 nanometer gold particles using phosphorus as the reducing agent, phosphorus is dissolved in ether and stirred with gold chloride at room temperature until the mixture turns black. The solution is then heated to form the red gold sol. To make the phosphorus solution, 2 milliliters of ether is placed in a small vial. Metallic phosphorus is both toxic and flammable and is stored under water. A small flake of the metal is shaved off with a scalpel and added to the ether in the vial. After about an hour, the solution will turn a milky white, indicating that saturation has been reached. In contrast to the sodium citrate and tannic acid methods of gold sol production, for reduction by phosphorus, the pH of the gold chloride must first be adjusted to from 7 to 7.2. To 240 milliliters of distilled water is added a half a milliliter of 4% gold chloride, and the pH of the gold solution is adjusted with 0.2 normal potassium carbonate, which has been filtered through a microporous filter. One milliliter of the phosphorus-saturated ether is diluted into 4 milliliters of ether, and 2 milliliters of this 20% saturated solution is added to the pH-adjusted gold chloride. The mixture is stirred at room temperature for 15 minutes, during which period it will gradually turn to a blue-black color. A saturated solution of copper sulfate is used to neutralize excess phosphorus and should be kept on hand throughout the procedure in case of spills. After stirring for 15 minutes, the gold phosphorus solution is transferred to the clean boiling flask and heated. In 10 to 20 minutes, the solution turns red, indicating formation of the colloid. The two primary factors affecting the conjugation of a protein to colloidal gold are the pH of the gold sol, which should be slightly basic to the isoelectric point of the protein, and the concentration of the protein to be mixed with the gold. pH and concentration isotherms are performed to determine these parameters. To measure the pH of the gold, a gel-filled pH electrode must be used, as the gold will flocculate and plug the pore on a liquid-filled electrode. The pH is adjusted with either 0.2 normal potassium carbonate or 1% acetic acid. While it is critical that the pH of the gold is basic to the isoelectric point of the protein, precise measurements above this point are not necessary, and litmus paper could also be used to measure the pH. To determine the appropriate pH for conjugation of a protein for which the isoelectric point is unknown, a pH isotherm can be performed. Here we add 1 milliliter of gold at a series of pHs to tubes containing sufficient IgG to stabilize the gold. The isoelectric point of the IgG is about 7. Below its isoelectric point, a protein has a net positive charge and causes spontaneous flocculation of the negatively charged gold particles. In this series, the effect is most pronounced at pH 5 to the left of the screen, where the gold turns blue immediately upon addition to the IgG. At pH 6 and 7, the effect is less obvious. The gold turns cloudy with a slight change in color towards blue. When a small amount of sodium chloride is added, a color change is clearly seen. At pH 7, 3, 8, and 9, the gold retains its pink color, indicating that the gold and the protein have formed a stable conjugate. The quantity of the protein necessary to completely coat the gold particles is determined in a similar fashion. 1 milliliter of gold at pH 7.3 is added to tubes containing dilutions of IgG ranging from 3 micrograms to 18 micrograms in 100 microliters of water. After a few minutes, a small quantity of 10% sodium chloride is added, and a color change from red to blue indicates the degree of stabilization of the gold. At 3 micrograms of IgG per milliliter of solution, the gold quickly turns blue. As the protein concentration increases to 6 and 9 micrograms, there is progressively less change in the color of the sol, and at 12 micrograms of IgG per milliliter of gold, there is only a slight shift in color toward blue. At 15 and 18 micrograms of protein per milliliter, no color change is seen, indicating that there is adequate protein to completely coat the gold particles, protecting them from flocculation by the sodium chloride. A slight excess over this concentration should be used for conjugation. The color change can be evaluated visually, or, for greater precision, can be determined photometrically, reading the absorbance at 525 nanometers for 18 nanometer gold particles, or at 540 nanometers for 5 nanometer gold. The absorbance of the stock solution of colloidal gold will be about 0.9. As the gold particles flocculate, light transmittance through the solution increases and the absorbance decreases. The key to conjugation of protein to gold, as in preparation of colloidal gold stock solutions, is cleanliness. The centrifuge tubes we use are either new disposable tubes or reusable polycarbonate bottles which are carefully washed in non-ionic detergents and then ultrasonically cleaned. The gold and polyethylene glycol solutions are filtered through microporous filters. The proteins are first dialyzed into low molecular strength buffers and then centrifuged or filtered to remove any debris. To prepare a protein gold conjugate, enough dialyzed filtered protein to stabilize the gold is placed in the centrifuge tube and diluted if necessary to 1/10 the volume of the gold to be added. This larger volume of protein helps to ensure good mixing. The gold, adjusted to the proper pH, is filtered directly into the tube and the two are gently mixed. After 15 minutes, 50 microliters of filtered 1% polyethylene glycol is added for each milliliter of gold, and the gold is centrifuged to concentrate it and separate it from unconjugated proteins. 18 nanometer and 30 nanometer particles are centrifuged for 30 minutes at 13,000 times G. 5 nanometer particles are centrifuged for 60 minutes at 50,000 times G. Small volumes of 18 nanometer and larger particles can be made up in microfuge tubes and spun down in a few minutes, the time depending on the volume of the gold and the speed of the centrifuge. The supernate is drawn off, being careful not to disturb the gold, which is a loose pool rather than a firm pellet. The gold can be resuspended in any buffer suitable to the protein and the use to which the conjugate will be put. The pH of the resuspending buffer, however, must be above the isoelectric point of the protein. Finally, to ensure that the protein is actually conjugated to the gold, anti-serum to the protein is used to precipitate the conjugate. A small amount of anti-serum is added to an aliquot of gold, and the mixture is incubated overnight at 4 degrees centigrade. Formation of a dark red precipitate is evidence for the presence of the protein on the gold particles. A method used in conjunction with colloidal is silver enhancement of the gold particles after they are bound to the specimen. The method involves the reduction of a silver metal salt by hydroquinone in a process similar to photography. The reduced silver coats the gold particles, rapidly increasing their size. Several manufacturers offer inexpensive kits for silver enhancement. Here we see 3 nanometer gold particles. The center frame shows the same particles after 2 minutes of silver enhancement. Note that some of the particles have increased in size while others have not. After 4 minutes, the silver-enhanced particles have grown large and irregular, fusing with adjacent grains so that a single silver grain may contain several gold particles. Here we see 3 nanometer gold particles labeling the IL-1 receptor on a population of mouse T cells. The cells were gold labeled and fixed in glutaraldehyde before being mixed with the silver solution. The cells which are expressing the IL-1 receptor are heavily labeled with the 3 nanometer gold particles and turn completely black after a few minutes exposure to the silver solution. By staining for longer times, even individual small gold particles will grow large enough to be easily seen by the light microscope.